Imagine trying to survive a winter so cold it could freeze your breath mid-air. No heating, no electricity, no thick glass windows. That was daily life for imperial peasants. Yet they didn't just survive, they mastered the cold. From sleeping with cows to sealing their homes with mud and straw, every move was calculated. Let's pull back the curtain on how they beat the year's deadliest nights. The secret to warm homes. If you picture an imperial peasant's house as a drafty wooden box in the middle of a snowy field, you're way off. These people knew their winters, and they built for them. Many homes were dug about 2 or 3 feet into the earth, a style archaeologists call sunken featured buildings, or Grubenhäuser. The soil acted like nature's insulation, keeping the bitter wind out and the warmth in. The walls weren't just random mud slapped on sticks either. They used wattle and daub, weaving sticks into a kind of lattice, then packing it with clay, straw, and yes, sometimes animal dung. It might sound grim, but that mix trapped heat and let the walls breathe, stopping moisture from building up. Right in the middle sat the hearth. It heated the room, cooked the food, and its smoke curled up into the rafters, coating them in a layer that kept insects away and actually preserved the thatch. The low ceilings, tiny windows, and steep snow-shedding roofs weren't about style. They were about survival. Every autumn, they patched the daub, re-thatched the roof, and hung hides on the walls to make the house winter-tight. And once the home was ready, the real challenge began, using every hour of daylight to keep the warmth alive. Winter life on a strict schedule. Once the house was sealed against the cold, survival became all about timing. Imperial villages didn't just let people work whenever they felt like it. Winter days ran like clockwork. The warmest hours, usually between mid-morning and early afternoon, were reserved for the heaviest outdoor jobs, chopping wood, hauling water, repairing fences. Everything else shifted indoors before the deep cold rolled in. Communities organized frost watches, nighttime shifts where families took turns keeping the communal fire going. Miss your watch, and you could end up paying a fine in firewood, grain, or even livestock. Some places used horns or drum beats to warn everyone when temperatures dropped fast, a signal to get animals secured and doors barred tight. Meal times doubled as strategic heat boosts. Bread was baked in massive communal ovens that stayed hot for hours. Villagers would often plan their indoor chores around these baking days, using the warm air spilling from the ovens to take the edge off their homes. This wasn't random tradition. It was learned over generations. By working with the sun and managing heat like a resource, they turned even the shortest, coldest days into something they could endure. And food storage played just as big a role in that plan. Food storage that rivaled modern methods, keeping food edible through months of freezing weather, was just as important as keeping the fire burning. Imperial peasants mastered it with underground storage pits. Think of them as early refrigerators. Dug deep enough to stay cool but not freeze, these pits kept a steady temperature all year. The earth acted like a natural thermal blanket, protecting the harvest from frost. Inside, crops like turnips, carrots, and cabbages were packed in layers of straw or hay to trap warmth and absorb moisture. In colder regions, they even used packed snow in measured layers to create thermal zones, keeping different foods at the perfect chill. Some of the more advanced pits had separate chambers connected by small airflow channels, letting them control humidity without knowing the science behind it. The results were impressive. Vegetables stayed fresh for months, and seeds could survive long enough to be planted the next spring. Archaeologists have even found medieval storage pits where the seeds were still viable hundreds of years later. This wasn't just about convenience. A well-built pit could mean the difference between making it to spring in good health or facing hunger before the thaw. And what they cooked from those stores was winter survival in a bowl. Meals made for heat. When the snow piled high and the night seemed endless, peasants turned to food that did more than fill their stomachs. It kept their bodies warm. The cornerstone was pottage, a thick stew that never truly left the pot. It simmered for days, sometimes weeks, with new ingredients tossed in whenever they were available. Root vegetables formed the base for slow-burning energy, beans and peas added protein, and grains gave quick fuel. This wasn't just comfort food. They understood through trial and error that higher calorie intake helped fight off the cold. In the depths of winter, fat consumption spiked. Butter, lard, and fatty cuts of meat weren't luxuries, they were life-saving fuel. Fermented foods like pickled vegetables and strong ales brought extra nutrients and helped ward off illness. Meal timing was just as deliberate as the recipes. A big breakfast at dawn jump-started body heat for the morning's work. Another hearty meal at midday kept the energy up, and a smaller supper before bed provided enough warmth to sleep through the coldest hours. It was a simple formula. Eat well, eat often, and let every bite work to keep you alive. And when night fell, they relied on something even more primal: body heat. Shared beds and human heating. In winter, warmth wasn't a private affair, it was a family effort. Most imperial peasant homes had one raised bed platform big enough for everyone to pile onto. Parents, children, sometimes even grandparents slept together, huddled close like stacked spoons. It wasn't about comfort, it was about survival. The combined body heat could raise the temperature under the blankets by several degrees, which, on a night well below freezing, could be the difference between waking up and not waking up at all. These platforms were deliberately raised off the ground to avoid the coldest layer of air that settles near the floor. In some clever designs, they were built right above livestock pens, letting the animal's body heat drift upward. Sleeping positions weren't random either. The youngest and oldest often stayed in the middle, where it was warmest, and people rotated spots during the night to keep heat evenly spread. It wasn't glamorous: straw mattresses, scratchy wool blankets, and very little personal space. But it worked. Every night, that shared bed acted like a living furnace. And for many households, the heat source didn't stop with the humans, because the animals themselves played a starring role. Livestock as living heaters. To an imperial peasant, a cow or a sheep wasn't just a source of milk or wool, it was a winter heating unit on 4 legs. When the cold set in, animals were brought inside, sharing the living space with the family. Larger animals like cows were given the prime spots closest to sleeping areas, their body heat radiating into the room. Smaller animals, sheep, goats, and even chickens, were tucked into corners or pens where they could fill gaps with warmth. This wasn't random placement. House layouts often channeled the rising heat from livestock toward the bed platform. The effect was real. A few cows could lift the indoor temperature by several degrees. The smell and mess were dealt with using layers of straw and ash on the floor. Not only did this absorb waste, it gave off extra warmth as it slowly decomposed, and by spring it became rich fertilizer for the fields. It was a win-win. Animals stayed warm, people stayed warmer, and nothing went to waste. Still, no matter how many cows you kept indoors, you weren't surviving winter without the right armor, and for that, they turned to clothing built for the cold. Clothing designed for survival peasants didn't fight winter in thin rags. They dressed with purpose. Wool was the star of the season, and here's the clever part: they rarely washed it during winter. Keeping the natural lanolin in the fibers made it far more water-resistant, so snow slid off instead of soaking in. Layers were key, the innermost soft and thin for comfort, the outer layers thicker and coarser to trap heat. Some garments were stuffed with moss or straw for insulation, and while it sounds itchy, it worked. Outer coats were often treated with a mix of animal fat and pine resin, creating an early waterproof coating that could last for months. Even undergarments had a survival twist. Blending wool with nettle fibers helped wick away sweat, so dampness didn't sap body heat. Hoods were shaped to block wind from any direction, and footwear was designed to minimize contact with frozen ground, reducing heat loss through the feet. Every piece had a job: to keep as much warmth in and as much cold out as possible. But no matter how good the clothes, one truth remained: winter survival wasn't a solo effort. The whole community had to work together to make it through. The power of community. In an imperial village, winter survival was never left to chance. or to one family alone. Everything was organized months in advance. Wood gathering teams were assigned before the first snow, with roles rotated so no one was stuck with the hardest jobs in the worst weather. Everyone contributed to the communal stockpiles of firewood, food, and bedding materials. Frost watches kept the entire settlement safe. Families took night shifts to monitor the cold, tend shared fires, and check on the most vulnerable, the elderly, the sick, and young children. On the coldest nights, people gathered in the communal hall or even in larger buildings like churches, where dozens of bodies in one space could raise the temperature by several degrees. These gatherings weren't just for warmth, they were moments to share news, plan repairs, and coordinate the coming day's work. Larger villages even had special warming rooms for those who couldn't manage the cold at home. The unspoken rule was simple. If one household failed, the whole village was at risk. By pooling their labor, heat, and resources, they turned survival into a collective effort. And when all these systems worked together, they could face even the longest, coldest nights of the year. The lesson they left us. What's striking about these winter strategies is how nothing was accidental. Every detail, from digging homes into the earth to sleeping above livestock to baking bread in massive communal ovens, was the result of generations refining what worked and discarding what didn't. Survival wasn't a matter of luck. It was an intricate system where home design, food storage, clothing, and community effort all locked together like gears. These people didn't have thermostats, insulated glass, or electric heaters, yet they achieved something remarkable: steady warmth through some of the harshest conditions imaginable. They understood their environment intimately, timing their days around the sun, using every scrap of heat a fire, a body, or an animal could offer, and building routines so ingrained they became tradition. It's easy to look back and think of peasant life as nothing but hardship. But the truth is, these communities were masters of adaptation. They proved that with shared effort, smart design, and a deep knowledge of the land, you could not only survive winter, you could make it to spring with your strength, your food stores, and your community intact. And in their world, that was the greatest victory of all.